Pam. So Pam Stegora AXBERG serves as the Chief Executive Officer of Union Gospel Mission Twin Cities. Prior to joining the mission, she held multiple executive leadership roles during her 14-year tenure at United Healthcare, most recently as Senior Vice President of Network Operations, a role in which she led the transformation of healthcare system and service providers. Her lifelong commitment also to promote diversity, equity, and inclusion has been demonstrated throughout her professional career as well as in her volunteer work. Pam was recently elected as a council member of the New Brighton City Council, previously served as a board chair of the YWCA Minneapolis, and is currently treasurer of the YWCA USA Board of Directors. Personally, she and her husband make their home in New Brighton, Minnesota, and enjoy spending time at their cabin with their 4 grown children. Training for the YWCA's triathlon. Good for you, Pam. Wow. And experiencing with new recipes. Her family's pierogi recipe won a blue ribbon at the Minnesota State Fair. Wow. Okay. Pam, would you please unmute yourself and join us today? And go ahead and take it away.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here virtually with all of you, and excited as you can go to hybrid. You can ask me questions about how we operated during COVID. If you ever want to know about some COVID protocols, because our doors never shut down in this last year, and most of my employees have still come to work. So thank you, though. I appreciate this opportunity. I really enjoyed learning even more about Rotary and your 4-way test. And I think your principles on truth and fairness are certainly something that resonates with our organization as well. And I didn't put in there, but I did not participate in Rotary, but I do have 3 international students who have lived with me. So Catherine and I have had a few conversations around what that looks like in terms of hosting international children of our own. So, well, I'm really
Pam, it's never too late to join.
You know, it isn't. You know, I keep telling I'll float that one to my husband and just tell him, it's probably time now that we're empty nesters, we probably should be hosting someone. I will think about that. Most definitely. So, but what I want to start with is I'm going to just show about a 1-minute video clip to start so you can hear a testimonial from one of our residents in whom we have helped. And then I'll go into my presentation. But I thought that way I can manage the technology. Here we are a year later, and we still always get nervous every time we're going to do the technology, right? And I want to share my YouTube story.
My life before I came to the mission was a daily struggle. I was living in Oildale, California, and I was hooked on drugs. I was just doubting my capabilities. I was doubting my value. I was doubting my place in the world and what I should be doing. I began sleeping outside in parks, backyards of friends' houses, and the occasional vacant building. I really was coming to a state of utter hopelessness. I remember thumbing through my cell phone, wondering, hoping, looking for somebody who could help me, and I came across my aunt's phone number, and she lives in New York, my Aunt Joe. And I thought, maybe she could help me in some way. And I gave her a call, and she answered, and I just kind of leveled with her. I told her my state of being. She said, okay, Rich, I'm going to have a friend call you. When he calls, just, be honest with him and tell him everything you're telling me. And I said, okay. And the next day, that phone call came. And it was a guy in Florida that my aunt knows. His name's Jerry. He knew somebody affiliated with the mission here. And he asked me quite pointedly, he said, look, if you want to give yourself a real chance at recovery, there's a place in St. Paul, Minnesota that has a bed open, and they will take you. So he said, I've already spoken with your aunt. She will pay for your bus ticket. Will you get on the bus? And yeah, at that point I was crying and I said yes. I considered myself, and all the evidence was that I was a throwaway dude. And the mission has repeatedly let me know that that is not the case. I think that I have found my identity as a believer in Jesus Christ. I was really looking for my identity. I've found friends, people I intend to keep in my life for the rest of my life, lifelong friends. I never knew that that life could be as good as it is today. I wake up with a lot of gratitude in my heart. I've begun my days with prayers and gratitude.
All right.
I have
I'm not going to figure out how to pause it. There. All right. So I wanted to open with a story of someone we have shared that we have helped. Our mission really is to lift men, women, and children out with dignity, out of hopelessness. And this is a story of Rich, who, like many of the men, women, and children, came to us in terms of at a low point when they felt they had nowhere else to turn to. So I want to tell you a little bit about Union Gospel Mission, and I'll go to my PowerPoint now and share that. And there we go. All right. And I thought maybe I might just start with, as I shared Rich's story, why I'm here. Since I'm brand new as CEO, I started in January. And I didn't intend that this is where I would be, where I would work after I left United Healthcare. I knew I wanted to go work in the not-for-profit space, but I wasn't exactly sure that this is where I would have chosen. And I think it chose me. When I started as the interim CEO last July, and wasn't sure that I would even apply for the job. And then I was appointed in January. But my story about why I couldn't walk away is when I was here for those first 6 months and I understood better the work that we did, the people that we help, I understood I wanted to have that type of impact. I wanted to be able to be part of how we can help people who are most in need and help transform their lives. And I learned that story as one of the first times when I said, let me help screen people for COVID in the morning, because every day, every morning at 6:30, we would screen every resident for COVID as they came to breakfast. And I learned 3 things when I did that is, first of all, I learned that everyone who walks through our doors has a name, because I'd have to write down the name of who I was screening, and I didn't know who they were. And they would come and they would tell me their name, and I wouldn't quite hear them. It was muffled through the mask. And then I had to get it right. And if I didn't spell it right, they would tell me how to spell it. And I'm like, their name matters. Who they are matters. My idea of homelessness started to shift. And then I realized that not only did they have a name, but they actually establish relationships and they trust people differently. When they would come to me, I had a very short line because I was a stranger and nobody knew who I was. And then next to me was my vice president of program, Rich. And everyone started lining up for him. And I'm like, Rick, everyone's lining up for you. He goes, well, they kind of know me. So they come over to my line. And I was like, they too, just like us, establish relationships, establish trust. Something else I didn't think I knew or I understood about homelessness. And then the third thing I realized that first morning I was screening everyone for COVID is I had to set aside my values and my judgment on what it meant to be homeless. Yeah, some of them might look like some of the people in the pictures here, But I also had people who came to the line and they were dressed nicely in a collared shirt and khaki pants. And they weren't so sure that they wanted their red tag on that they'd been screened for the day, because they were actually on their way to work that day. The men that come and stay with us in their 2 years recovery, long after they are overcoming some of their trauma and their addictions, they are setting up themselves financially to move on to a life of stability in the community, which means they are working here, establishing new financial credibility before they can move beyond our walls. And I had to know that, and yes, some might look like the people we think of, and some really do not. And they look just like you and I in terms of what that looks like. So in the end, I came to this, and I'm honored and humbled because I couldn't walk away. And I will say, this is a picture of my family right here on Thanksgiving, as we came to serve meals. So I put my family's picture in there. It's actually 3 of my kids and then Kadeh, who I've done the Humphrey Fellowship with. And this is us during some of my employees during COVID. So as I shared, our mission has been here for almost 120 years. And so we have a long heritage of the work that we do. We do work in terms of thinking about ourselves in terms of hospitality or radical hospitality. We welcome everyone through our doors. So while we are a Christ-centered organization, you do anyone who is seeking food or shelter. We take people of all faiths in terms of those that we serve. So I thought I might just talk a little bit about homelessness in Minnesota. In terms of what it looks like, and you would actually see that we continue, and it's something that's readily in the news, is homelessness is continuing to grow. Actually, a recent survey I just looked at beyond this using HUD survey data is a 12% increase in homelessness. Children with parents is certainly one that actually has been growing, as well as overall homelessness. The Wilder research study does a study every 3 years. And so this year they will again be doing their study. So we'll be looking forward to what that information is. At Union Gospel Mission, we actually have 2 different programs, and I'll talk about those a little bit later in terms of where we are able to serve those who come to us homeless, as well as those that come to us with addictions. But I thought I might talk a little bit about understanding poverty and homelessness. Generational poverty is defined as living in poverty for at least 2 generations. This is really an important issue to me in that we certainly serve adult men and women, and that is what people mostly think of. But in our Women and Children's program, we actually also, any woman who comes to us with children, we guarantee their child a spot in our early child development center. And we believe that is one of the key things that we can do around eliminating generational poverty. The statistics demonstrate that if you grew up homeless or in trauma or in poverty, the likelihood that you will continue in poverty based on that homelessness data is tremendous, such that we know that if we want to be also a part of breaking the cycle of poverty and homelessness, we need to be helping those little kiddos as well. So we are really proud of our Early Child Development Center guaranteeing those spots, and really the focus that we have in addition to early childhood education for the children in our daycare early childhood center. We also provide mental health therapists that are dedicated for children as well. We really believe that is part of how we can break that generational cycle of poverty. There's actually some research that just came out, and it was the last 2 weeks from the Itasca Project around the importance of the first 1,000 days in people's lives. And so what does that mean developmentally? And I'll be looking forward to how we can be learning more and incorporating that into our program that we have for children as well. And then we also have this notion around situational poverty. And that is when people come and they suddenly have a income loss. And we can think of that as this pandemic this last year, right? In terms of people who might not have found themselves previously in a situation of poverty, but it could be from job changes, loss of jobs, some situational thing. And I think of, and I'm learning every day, you know, homelessness is not only what people have where they have nowhere to go. Homelessness can be where people are living in their cars. Homelessness can be where people are just couch surfing in terms of which friend or family member can they go to next to stay with until they can figure out what that setback might look like. So we really do try to understand when people come to us and meet them. Union Gospel Mission sees people who are at their lowest usually because they have nowhere else to go, or they have exhausted everywhere else that they have. With that, this notion of hopelessness often comes with it. And it's not often that it's just the lack of financial resources. They may be having educational issues. Many of the people come to us may not have ever finished high school, but not all. We actually see the whole spectrum, to those to actually some that actually, we recently had an attorney. So the whole spectrum, but they had an addiction that caused them to lose everything. We see that there's often without any type of parental or family or support network. And so we often become that, or others who are our residents become that support network. And then we also wrap around this spiritual notion. Is people also in this generational poverty, they are much more in this notion of what does it take for me to survive today? They are not looking for long-term things. Every day it is, what do I need to stay warm today? What is it that I need for food today? And it is this notion of how do I get through today? It is also why it also, once people are given food and shelter, it takes a long time of healing in terms of for people to move beyond that. The example that someone shared with me that I like is that while people are homeless, it's like they're driving a car 60 miles an hour, and whatever comes at them, all they're focused on is what does it take for me to get food and shelter? And if they have some trauma in their life, it goes in the back seat. If they have some other fun, it goes in the back seat, and they're driving 60 miles an hour. And then the car, if they come to us and we give them food and shelter, it comes to a screeching halt. And suddenly things that they didn't have to care about and all of the trauma in their life comes from the back seat and floods them into the front seat. And so now they have to take time to say, now how do I take care of the rest of those things that I need to in order to get myself to a place where I can move beyond the trauma that put me here initially. So I'm going the wrong way. So let me tell you what Union Gospel Mission does is we provide food and shelter for emergency basis. For our men's campus, any man can come on for food and shelter, no questions asked. We serve 365 warm meals a day, three meals a day. Our big meals would be at Thanksgiving and Christmas. We have men's programs from emergency shelter through transitional housing and short-term housing to our whole full programs. We have two different programs, one target an AA based for substance abuse and alcoholism. And then we have another one, which is discipleship, which actually is a program work study type of program as well. We wrap around that with our adult education and job skills. And then you heard me mention my women and children's program. We do not have women's emergency shelter at this time. We take them directly into our program. Both men's and women's program, they can stay with us up to about 2 years. So it's a bit about recovery, eliminating and reconciling with your trauma, and then setting yourself up for financial stability beyond us. What we really do is we say, how do we first meet you with your basic needs of food and shelter? And just and then how do we wrap around social programs? How do we wrap around mental health? And then lastly, how do we wrap around spirituality in terms of how you can get to whole health? We added mental health in 3 years ago. We have on-site therapists on both of our men's and women's campuses. And it's a service that we see we just need to be doing much more. but this whole notion of body, mind, and soul. So what we have done is last year we served almost 300,000 meals per year. We've have over 1,000 men in our transitional housing programs. Really proud of our kindergarten readiness, particularly proud of that statistic when you realize the trauma and the social economic background of the children that we support. Our early childhood education center serves not only the children in our center, but we also serve community-based children. And many of our community-based children are women who completed our program, but they keep their children in their early childhood education. One statistic that I'm really proud of is 9% of our residents through our Christ Recovery Program started off homeless with us and have moved on to home ownership. So we are about transforming lives. We're about seeing a difference. We actually have a substance abuse recovery rate of about, we just did a 10-year look back in one of our programs, and 42% of the people who had completed our program are still sober. That compares to some national benchmarks of about 16%. So we think the difference is we're very holistic. We also have longevity. We deal with all of the trauma issues behind it. And in terms of what that looks like as people move beyond and establishing themselves and ready to move beyond our walls. So a length of time that we support people to recover, and then to financial literacy, wrapping around, some of the most dangerous time for people is the first time they get their first paycheck. So how do we wrap ourselves around that as well? So we're really proud of the numbers we do, but we couldn't do this without the help of others, and I'll talk about that. But I thought I'd put in a little bit about COVID. Is throughout COVID this last year, our doors remained completely open. We socially distanced our beds. We kept our capacity at the same. We just opened up more conference room and put cots in more conference room. We screen everyone that comes through our doors, and we screened over 100,000 individuals these last year. When we had the peak of COVID in last November, and there was no place for us to send anybody who tested positive for COVID, we kicked out our administrative and our chaplains, and we put a whole new wing for an isolation wing, and where we could isolate 20 men who either tested positive for COVID or had to quarantine because they were in close contact. The biggest risk, though, that people thought it would really come through the homeless community, but the biggest risk was really that of our own staff, who had a much broader social circle than those that we served, bringing it into our walls, but really showed some flexibility and resiliency. We did on-site testing, and we're really grateful for all the health partners that came into our chapel, and we converted into a test center. It was the only way that we could take any outbreak and find the asymptomatic. And then we did on-site vaccinations here as well. One of the other things, like many organizations, you found yourself, you think you're 120 years old, so you've got this legacy of things to do that and then you find yourself in the pandemic as now I need to do things differently and in a new way. So when the schools closed down, we opened up distance learning for our children. And so we actually kind of became a school for our children that were staying here. Because the women needed to, and their moms needed to continue their programming. So we took some of our child development center staff, helped them with the distance learning, and 60% of the kids in our distance learning program had some positive behavior improvement. So it was an opportunity for us to reinvent what we did and how we did it. We're happy when children can go back to school, but certainly like everyone else and like you and we needed to find new ways of doing things to support what needed to get done. But we're really proud that we were able to, our employees were considered essential employees and continued to come to work. So I thought I might tell you a little bit about how we are funded. And you can see here the potatoes there. We give out Thanksgiving meals, but all of our potatoes are donated, and we ran out of potatoes last year for the first time ever. We ran out of potatoes. We had 20,000 pounds of potatoes we distributed. And in a picture of on Saturday, I went to go get marshmallows, and I called our head cook. I said, James, I said, I understand I can get 10 cases of marshmallows. Could you use those? He said, sure, I'll buy yams and sweet potatoes. And I'm like, very creative. So those marshmallows will be used with yams and sweet potatoes. But we actually, so we take in-kind donations. So we'll take donations of clothing, for food and all kinds, and then services and volunteers. For clothing, we'll take men's, women, and children's clothing. We'll take toiletry types of products. Every day when someone comes into our emergency shelter, in addition to a warm meal, they can have a shower. When men in our emergency shelter shower, we give them a new shirt, we give them underwear, we give them socks, and then 3 days a week, they will get pants or shorts, depending upon the season. And then every 3 months, they would be eligible for a jacket or for shoes. I will say that we are funded, put in a plug for volunteers. We have, if anybody volunteers, and you can use this, any of the organizations you volunteer, ask them for dollars for doers or employee matching on volunteers. But probably the bottom line is 90% of our funding comes from the general public. I am just continuing to be overwhelmed and amazed the generosity of the general public that funds us in the, and it has continued through the pandemic. So we significant, the rest of that primarily comes from a small amount of fees that we may pass or foundational grants, but we are almost, largely supported by donors. Volunteers are also an important part of our mission. We have over 4,000 volunteers, even during COVID, 160,000 hours of service. And then our clinical programs are augmented. We have partnerships with the local universities where their students need to have clinical hours, and we provide the clinical supervision, and both for mental health as well as for social work. So we really couldn't do our work without our volunteers, and they do all kinds of things for us. Volunteers do anything from serving the meals at men's campus. It is all volunteer served meals, but we also have mentorship. We have job training that's done, cleanup projects. We just use our volunteers in everything that we do. Our holiday at Thanksgiving and at Christmas, largely all work done by volunteers as well. So I'll put in a plug. This organization knows a lot about volunteering, but it is a great opportunity and for people in terms of what that looks like. Don't want to spend a lot of time on that, but I want to make sure. So I already talked about that, but here's your information on volunteering. And then the last thing that I probably, before I see if there's a question, is that we do have our upcoming celebration of hope, and I'll put it in the chat box, but it is a free concert on Friday, April 16th, and I would invite you to join that if you want to learn more about our organization or have a free concert as well. You will be able to get this ticket of hope. I sent it in advance, but probably if you're live next week, you'll be able to have access to it. Is if you never have wondered, what do I do with people who I see on the street corner and I go, I don't know what to do, is you can always, I handed out our tickets of hope, but people can come to us. We do not need a ticket. If they come through our doors, we will feed them. But this at least would give you something to give to people on the street corner. And people may then say, gosh, where else can I go? What else can I do? So we will serve people without this, but it does help. I know when I have something I can give to someone to try and refer them, where else can they go? Because for me, this is the first point. You start with food, you start with shelter, and then we have the conversation after that that says, what else do you want to do? What else can I do for you? Can I help you get your birth certificate so you could apply for a job? Have you thought about doing something more? What can I do for you? It starts that conversation, that starts that transformational change that helps these individuals move on to be the type of person that is self-sustaining in the community when they move beyond our walls. So with that, I will stop sharing and see what questions I can answer for you.
So if anybody has a question, go ahead and unmute yourself or put it in the chat. And then Mary, if you could share that with Pam.
Pam, this is Dan Hunt. So the people who show up at your door must be a broad spectrum of how they ended up there. Uh, Taken advantage of, bad luck, bad choices. How do you stabilize them, and then how do you go about deciding what each person needs from your organization?
So you stabilize them first by giving food and shelter and building a relationship. And then we have a couple of different program options for them. And we actually will refer out if we think there are other programs that better suit them. So it varies in terms of what that looks like. But it really is everyone who comes in, even our emergency shelter, have access for mental health, which I'm really happy that we can even provide it to on the emergency side, because that is something that is solely so lacking and people just don't have enough access because it's in such limited supply. But working with the mental health assessment, and then you heard me talk about job training, but it is all different for what people might need for job training and education. One of the pictures I had in there of RT, he worked for 1.5 years to get his GED. And he never thought in his wildest dreams that he would ever get it. So we do have different expectations based on who comes into us. We do require that everyone goes to our adult education center, but in some cases, it may be you just work on your GED. In other cases, we're really preparing you, and we've got a scholarship where we'll help you go on for some type of college program if that's what's relevant and best for you. So we actually customize any of our adult education to where they would need to be, and we look for them to show improvement based on where they came in.
Just a quick follow-up question. No one else has a question. How do you establish trust with a person who, for lack of a better phrase, is bottomed out in their life and thinks they have no one?
Yeah. When I watched, I'm going to tell you another COVID screening story, because I had my husband come, and it was Thanksgiving week. And I said, oh, we're doing nothing at 6 o'clock on Sunday morning. And we're leaving afterwards. He goes, Pam, your team asked different questions than you did. I said, well, what do you mean? There's these 6 questions. Have you been exposed to COVID? Do you have a fever? You know, do you lost your taste? I go, it's pretty clear. He goes, oh no, Pam. He goes, did you hear Chris? I said, and I had to think. And Chris afterwards would go, I see your shoes don't look very good. Do you have the right type of shoes, or can I help you with that? I see your jacket. And what we find is over a few days after they've been in our emergency shelter, you can have a different conversation with them. But again, it takes exposure, it takes patience. We certainly, I would tell you, have a high number of people who come through our programs who don't complete our programs, but we welcome them back the second time when they're ready to come back as well. But I would say you have to work really hard to meet them where they're at repeatedly, and give them time and give them space, but provide them safety while you're doing that.
So I added a couple questions in the chat. So I have some experience with community action. And do people find you through agencies like Community Action?
So twofold, we do get referrals and we get some from the police department. We get some from the 411 information referral. We've had to do a little bit of education, because sometimes people think they can't refer to us because we're a Christian-based organization. They can refer to us. And again, we take people of all faiths through our emergency, but when you go through program, we'll use Christ-centered as part of our programming values. So I think we have an opportunity to improve some of our connections in the local community. And so we're working on that as well, but we get just a whole variety of referrals.
So, and then what is your early childhood education program based on, like Head Start?
So we actually, I got to learn a little bit more about our curriculum here in that, because I was just looking at our results, but we align ourselves to the goals and outcomes that the St. Paul school system uses for early childhood education. And then we use the same standards as they do for assessments.
Okay, super.
Okay, I think we are up to the time. Pam, thank you so much for
Thank
coming
you.
and presenting this very, very important information. And thank you for those tickets. I've never seen something like that before. I would love to like have a stack in my car because we all see people that might need some help, and at least to be able to give them something of value. There you go. I love it. What a great idea. So thank you so much. We really appreciate it. And we'll be in touch. And also, once again, going back to one of my first points was please consider Rotary for maybe not just yourself, but maybe your staff as well. It sounds like you've got a lot of people who like to serve there, and that's what we do. Rotary is all about service above self, and so sounds like you guys are doing it. So anyways, once again, thank you everybody for coming and joining us. Please remember to vote for your grants today, and then get a hold of Masha for your interviews and sign up for the district conference and blah, 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 blah. I'm here to tell you what to do with your Rotary minutes. Please, again, join us next week as like I said, we have our hybrid meeting. We'll get to sit by each other with masks and social distanced and all that, but we get to come back into the Edina Country Club next Tuesday. Joe Sparts, the state director of the Concord Coalition of Minnesota, is going to be coming to join us as our speaker that day. So anyways, have a great week, everybody, and we will see you then. And remember, Rotary opens opportunities.